Hi, Mark.
So, Leonid Iosifovich, let's start.
Of course. Yeah, let's go ahead. Thanks.
Okay, so my name is Dmitry Tolmachev. I'm the Dean of Graduate School of Economics and Management of Ural Federal University. And I will give you maybe a brief introduction about the National Prize in Applied Economics. So the prize was founded in July 2009. So and there were 6 founders at start: the National Research University High School of Economics, the New Economic School, Fresh, Moscow, Ural Federal University, Yekaterinburg, the ARET, so the Association of Research Economic Think Tanks of Russia, the Institute of International Economics and International Relations of the Academy of Sciences, and the Business Magazine Expert, Moscow. So 6 founders. Since that time, the prize is awarded biannually, so once per 2 years. And it's awarded to the most important published works that are focused on the Russian economy analysis on different levels. So the country level or regional level, industry or company. So anyways, the main aim was and is to identify the really important research papers that could be useful for both purposes, for improving of the efficiency of Russian economy and economic policy, and also for the development of economic research in Russia. There were 5 groups of winners. In 2010, the first prize was awarded for the paper "Myth and Reality of Flat Tax Reform, Microestimates and of Tax Evasion Response and Welfare Effects in Russia." Clara Sabrianova Peter, so she graduated in our university, in Ural State University. Yuri Gornichenko and Jorge Martinez Vasquez. 2012, the paper by Andrei Markevich and Mark Harrison about so it was a really interesting work about the figures of national income, etc., in the period between 1913 and 1928. 2014, so it was the paper by Laura Solanko and William Pyle, "The Composition and Interests of Russia's Business Lobbies, Testing also hypothesis of the encompassing organization." 2016, it was the paper by Evgeny Yakovlev and Ekaterina Zhuravskaya, "The Unequal Enforcement of Liberalization, Evidence from Russia's Reform of Business Regulation." And the last one, 2 years ago, the paper by Inna Ganguly, "Saving Soviet Science, the Impact of Grants when Government R&D Funding Disappears." It was a series of very interesting papers, but just that one so was awarded. And what else? Now this year, this round, the current round, the jury of this round includes 4 people: Sergei Vasilyev, this scientific advisor of National Research University High School of Economics in St. Petersburg; Alexander Muravyev, also from the same institution; Richard Erickson, the Department of Economics of East Carolina University; and Laura Solanko, that I just mentioned, senior advisor of the Bank of Finland Institute for Economists in Transition, with it. The head of jury, Leonid Polishchuk, and now I hand you over to Mr. Polishchuk. Thank you for your attention.
Большое спасибо. Many thanks and good afternoon to everyone. I had the privilege to chair the award committee of the Russian National Award in Applied Economics, and I will chair the remainder of this award ceremony. I was asked first to say a few words about the procedure as to how the award committee has made its recommendations. Then I will have the pleasure and the privilege to announce the 2020 award, Russian Award in Applied Economics. And then we will ask the winners of the award to say a few words. Then I will announce some more papers that have received honorable mentioning of the committee. And then there will be a presentation of the 2020 winner paper. After the presentation, there will be some time for discussion. And I will probably ask those who are attending this conference on Zoom to ask questions that they might have in the chat column so that the authors will be able to respond to these questions and comments. First of all, about our work. The award committee comprised 5 people that were already announced. The governance of this prize is quite complex, has checks and balances to ensure broad representation of different stakeholders in economics, Russian economics, and the international economics as a profession. We have, first of all, the academic committee, which comprises distinguished economists from Russia, from around the world, from the private sector, from the central bank, from the Russian government. We have representatives of leading schools in Russia, Moscow State University, National Academy, the Academy of National Economy, the New Economic School, and of course, last but not least, the Harvard School of Economics. We have faculty members from the University of Chicago, UCLA, from Sorbonne and Sciences Po on the award committee. So it's a very comprehensive and respectful body. The role of the award committee is to make nominations for the award and also to monitor the process. This year, the award committee had nominated 43 papers. These 43 papers were first screened by the organizing committee of the award to ensure their eligibility. The main requirement was that the paper should have been published in a 2-year period, which ends June 30th, 2020. For this and for some other technical reasons, the number of papers that were that entered the reviewing process was reduced to 26. The second stage was to comprise a set of external reviewers that by regulations are not supposed to be members of the award committee. So these reviewers were selected, also very respected professionals. And these papers were entered in the peer review process. After this process, the award committee, the jury, stepped in, and the jury screened the results of the reviews It was a difficult job because all of the papers submitted were quite strong, published in very good journals. I should also tell you about the selection criteria that we were supposed to follow. The first criterion was that a paper should be relevant for Russian economic development, for Russian policymaking process. The second one, it should be a cutting-edge study. It should meet all of the international standards and theory and empirical work. It should be essential an example of how a good economic.
Use Marx what?
Did they buy Marx Sprachke thing?
I think they did, kind of.
Say it again. What did you say? I didn't hear it. I'm sorry about that. Okay. Well, I was going to say that the jury was and the experts, the reviewers, followed
So
two
I
main.
think that they did, because the response was simply that something about the Russian translate. No, I'm not.
Okay.
Maxi, could you switch on off your phone?
All right. Well, I think there is a small technical problem. Anyway, to try one more time, the selection criteria included, first of all, high relevance for Russian economic development and for Russian policymaking. And another one was that paper should be novel. It should be cutting-edge research, both theoretically and empirically. And we wanted the selected papers to be standard bearers of what Russia-related economic research should be. Out of 43 nominations that were made initially, we reduced the number of papers down to 26. As I said, these 26 papers were entered in a peer review process, and the committee reviewed the results of the peer review. And based on this result, on the first zero stage, it's check the eligibility of the paper. First stage, it's external reviewers. Second stage, to select a short list of papers based on the results on the evaluation submitted by peer reviewers. And third and final stage, to have a short list of the papers that were read and peer reviewed by all of the committee members. And as a result of this third and final stage and extensive discussion of the paper submitted, the award committee made its recommendations as to which paper should be the winner of this year's cycle. And we also selected several papers for honorable mentioning. I'm going to name all the papers, 5 of them, that entered into the short list from which the final selection was made. I would like to say that our decision-making procedure was transparent, inclusive, and I'm happy to report that our final decisions have been made unanimously. It was a consensus of all of the committee members. Now, without further ado, I am happy to announce that the 2020 Russian National Award in Applied Economics goes to the paper titled Democratizing Access to Higher Education in Russia, the Consequences of the Unified State Exam Reform. The paper is co-authored by an international team of economists, including Marco Francesconi, Essex University, the United Kingdom, Fabian Slaminchik, International Institute of Economics and Finance, HSC University, Moscow, and Anna Yurko, same institute, same HSC University. I would like to give my heartfelt congratulations to the colleagues for this outstanding accomplishment. They are fifth in the line in a very strong stream of papers that were acknowledged by the National Award in Applied Economics. And I want also to thank Marka, Fabian, and Anna for attending this presentation. It's a great job. And just a few words as to why the committee has decided. And as I said, it was not a simple choice because pretty much all of the nominations were very strong papers. And in the short list, All of the papers were exceptionally strong, so the competition was tough. And once again, congratulations for making to the first slot of this contest. The paper is a study of the outcome of the, I'm not going to say much about this paper because unfortunately Fabian will present this paper and I want to steal the glory from him, but just a few words to explain why we have decided that this is the 2020 award. First, quite obviously, the paper is extremely relevant. So its relevance for Russian economic development, for Russian policy process is pretty obvious. It's well known that there were lots of debates. It was quite a controversial reform, and people point out to some of its shortcomings. So quite a few people are, to put it frankly, angry about this reform. So evaluating this reform impartially using data is extremely important, and one of the main ideas, one of the main objectives of this reform was to democratize the system of higher education in Russia, to increase mobility of younger people in Russia, and in fact to allow them to allow the country to have a multiplier of its human capital, so that abilities that could be distributed across the country can be enhanced by more able young people being able to get high quality education. So this is an important driver of economic development, and the authors of the paper showed exactly that. They demonstrated by using a very smart empirical strategy, which was very beautifully executed, that indeed the paper has, the reform has increased mobility of the graduates, spatial mobility, first and foremost, and they provided an estimation of this multiplier, mobility multiplier. The mobility increased threefolds. Another thing which I liked about this paper was that myself and my colleagues, of course, what the paper also estimated the effect of this reform, not only on those fortunate who were able to get slots in good schools, but also on those who stayed at home. And they showed that the success of these more gifted individuals does not come at the expense of those who stay at home. In other words, there is no negative spillover effect, something that people were concerned about. There is a big stream of literature on the impact of mobility on human capital allocation and accumulation. And this paper has made a valuable and important contribution internationally and especially in the Russian context to this stream of research. So this is, in a nutshell, these are, in a nutshell, the reasons as to why my colleagues and I were happy to select this paper as the awardee for this year's award. Now, I would like to ask the authors of this paper, Marco, Fabian, and Anna, to hopefully say a few words. This is not yet a formal presentation of the paper, Fabian, so please hold off for a short while. After this acknowledgement remarks, I would like to announce other papers that the committee has chosen and would like to support and endorse, but and then we'll have the formal presentation of the paper. So Marco, if you please, the floor is yours. We are quite happy to have you here, even if virtually.
Thank you very much. It would have been wonderful, in fact, to be there physically and all together sharing this experience. Well, what can I say? I mean, first of all, I would like to thank you all very much. Thank the Commission, thank the panel who has done this job and selected our work. But I would like to express, first of all, I mean, immediately after the thank you, I would like to express also my sheer surprise. And after hearing particularly all the description that you have described for the selection and the shortlisting of the other papers of extremely high caliber and high quality, it has been really a total surprise. I mean, initially I was surprised even more now after you've described how you've done your selections. Secondly, I would like to say that it is a great honor, in fact, to be to have this type of acknowledgement and recognition by a group of peers and by a group of policymakers and people who are coming from the wider community, not just from the research community, recognizing to some extent the contribution that we are making. You know, the descriptions that Leonid has just made was really very deep, very profound, and I am very proud of what he said about our work. And last thing I want to say is that I hope that this is going to be the first of a long stream of contributions that Anna, Fabian, and myself are planning to do. We are indeed working on something else relevant, we hope, again, for the Russian economy. And given the slant that we always have of really having an, you know, a specific, a particular attention to policy making and the effectiveness of particular policies that governments introduce, I hope that the contribution we have made, the one that we are celebrating today, but also the new contributions that we are going to make in the future, will be good springboards for new policy interventions. You know, the interaction between academia and policymakers, you know, that should be keeping going. I mean, they are coming up with, policymakers are coming up with sometimes interesting, sometimes less interesting policy innovations. Our job is to evaluate them as cleanly, as scientifically, as you know, as precisely as possible. And then the ball goes back to the policymakers. Hopefully they are there to understand where they have done things right and repeat them in the future, and where they've done things wrong and eventually avoid them in the future. And I think that, you know, we are in the process of doing this, and we hope, I certainly hope, that this is the first start of these long-term conversations that we may have with Russian policymakers in order to increase well-being for everyone and in order to make new impacts, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of many millions of Russian citizens. Thank you very much. I think, Leonid, you are not on.
Well, thanks so much. Yes, I was not. I don't know what happened. What I said was here. And then I want to thank you for your remarks. And I would like to ask now Fabian to say a few words, please, if possible. Fabian, we cannot hear you. Please turn your mic on. Fabian? Yes, okay. Now it should work. Perfect. Thanks very much. There are some frictions, but we can work them out. Yes, please, sir, go ahead.
I'll try to be exceedingly brief because I will have the honor to present our joint work. But very briefly, again, I'm going to reiterate a few things that Marco has said very well. Number one, that this is an enormous surprise, of which we are extremely proud, the three of us, especially because the panel and the team of people that have selected our paper for this great honor are people that we have the highest regard for. I mean, so from every point of view, you know, who are the past winners, who are the people that select the prize, who are the remarkable papers that receive honorable mentions. I mean, from all points of view, this is an enormous honor and something that, I mean, far exceeds anything we were expecting when, you know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we were having coffee somewhere near Shawolovskaya, and someone came up with the, you know, started talking about the unified state exam, and we said on this journey together. So that's number one I want to sort of reiterate, but I think it's important to say it. Thank you very much for this great honor. I want to also thank my team, my co-authors, Marco and Anna, for this great experience, for your friendship, for putting up with my temper, and in general, really, thank you so much. I look forward to keep collaborating and working together, exchanging ideas. Also, I want to thank the university, the Higher School of Economics, and ISEF, because they have really supported us in many different ways. For instance, Marco has visited us several times. This has been instrumental in pushing the work forward. I've also had the opportunity to visit the UK at one point. This was also financed by the university. So from that point of view, it has been absolutely great. And finally, even though I don't think anyone is on here, I have to thank my family. Back in Argentina, I could not do it. So I'm gonna leave it here for now. Thank you very much. You're still muted.
Thanks very much, Fabian. You studied mobility, and good to your words, you used mobility to produce this excellent paper. I'm very glad to hear that. And Anna, please, we would like to hear from you now.
Yes, well, thank you. It is pretty hard to speak after Marco and Fabian to have anything to add. So I'll be fairly brief. So I will join them in extending all the gratitude to the for this prize to the panel. I think we were quite surprised to receive this this honor. First, when we first were notified about it, and then there was sort of a second wave of surprise, at least for me, when we saw the shortlist and how wonderful the other papers and how interesting and well published the other papers on that list are. So it is indeed a great honor to compete and to receive this prize with such competition, especially. And also, I would really like to thank Fabian and Marco. The working with them is absolutely wonderful and rewarding, and I'm glad we're still continuing this work on other projects. Fabian, I think, worked especially hard and deserves the great, the largest share, maybe the data work, all the things that he's been doing. So a lot of this is on him, so that's I guess is pretty much it. And thank you again. And well, Fabian is going to talk about the paper itself, to present it. He's done this before. It's always very interesting, even if you participate in writing a paper, it's very interesting to hear him present it.
Thanks very much, Anna. And I would like to take the three of you on your words that you intend to continue this extremely fruitful cooperation. And there are many other controversial issues ahead of us. And the best thing that professional economists can do is to address these issues using evidence, data, modern tools, techniques, and shed lights on matters which are not obvious, to separate myth from realities and to contribute to policy debates, policy-making process. These are precisely the objectives that this award is about to support. Anna mentioned the short list, and before I go there, I should clarify that the award paper was published in a highly ranked journal, European Economic Review. Congratulations on that accomplishment. The award committee selected several other papers that entered into our short list. 4 altogether. 3 of these papers were proposed for honorable mentioning. And it is my great pleasure to announce these 3 papers. I'm not sure if the authors are here, but one way or another, we congratulate them on these great accomplishments alphabetically. These 3 papers are, the first one is by Olga Malkova, University of Kentucky, the United States. And the paper is titled, Can Maternity Benefits Have Long-Term Effects on Childbearing? Evidence from Soviet Russia. The winning paper and this paper also all deal with social capital accumulation. Oh, sorry, not social, of course, human capital accumulation, different types. So this paper was published in Review of Economics and Statistics. It's another highly ranked journal. And why this paper was selected? Well, first, because demographic problems remain highly relevant for Russia, because maternity capital is a policy measure that is used to support childbearing and population growth in Russia. So this historical exercise in recent Soviet history sheds important light on these efforts. This paper is a beautiful combination of bold theory and empirical work. The theoretical part of this paper reminded me of Gary Becker's pioneering works, which applied economic thinking to different aspects of human activities. It's the first time in my knowledge that this logic was applied to the decisions to have children, to childbearing, to fertility decisions where children are consumed by parents, and what matters in these decisions is quality and quantity. So that approach proved to be quite fruitful because it enabled Olga to come up with hypotheses with empirical strategy, and she made extremely good use of the available data and demonstrated that indeed this program of the Soviet government, initiated in 1981, had a long-lasting impact, positive impact on fertility. So that's a very important paper and a very strong one. And as you see, and as you will see, the job of the award committee was quite difficult to select the best paper of this shortlist. The second paper that is honorably mentioned by the committees is by Andrei Markevich, the New Economic School, Moscow, and Ekaterina Zhuravskaya, Paris School of Economics, France. The paper is titled Economic Effects of the Abolition of Serfdom, Evidence from the Russian Empire. That paper is published in the American Economic Review. Now, why this paper is important, other than the fact that it's very well produced and published in a highly ranked journal, there is a big literature in economic history showing that there was a productivity increase in the Russian economy after the abolition of serfdom, but the causal link between the abolition of serfdom and this growth of productivity was not properly proven, and this paper does exactly that. It shows that all of the positive effects of the reform, such as the growth of agricultural productivity, such as the industrial output, and last but not least, spatial mobility. Again, this is a bridge between this paper and the paper that received the award, were all contributing factors, and they were all outcomes of the abolition of serfdom. So this paper is indeed a very sound empirical proof that you can use some Russian, "Svoboda лучше, чем не свобода," Everyone knows that formula of freedom is better than non-freedom, and as such, it is quite important. The paper also produces some interesting evidence as to what was the mechanism that linked the increased mobility of peasants and abolition of serfdom to economic outcomes. So in a word, it's a perfect paper. Andrei Markevich and Ekaterina Zhuravskaya were awardees of the National Award in the previous years. They were not eligible for the award this year, but we're very happy to give this paper honorable mentioning. The third paper that received honorable mention is the paper by Evgeny Yakovlev, also a New Economic School, Moscow. The paper's title is Demand for Alcohol Consumption in Russia and its Implication for Mortality. The paper is published in the American Economic Journal, Applied Economics. The importance of this paper is that it provides empirical estimation of price elasticity of alcohol consumption. We all know that alcohol consumption is a very serious matter in Russia. And it's an important question as to whether changing prices of alcohol would have an expected impact on consumption. People who remember the Soviet efforts to reduce alcohol consumption in the 1980s by manipulating with prices may have some doubts. And I remember a popular song of that time. It says something like "Pili pьем и будем пить." That is, we drank, we are drinking, we'll keep drinking irrespective of what the prices are. So to empirically estimate the elasticity of demand for alcohol consumption was an important task, and the paper provides strong evidence. Again, econometrics is perfect, that such elasticity is significant. There is also an important peer effect in these decisions, and this is empirically a policy relevant paper, and it's also a beautiful piece of applied economic research. And we're quite happy to honorably mention this paper as well. I told you that the award committee selected 5 papers to our short list. We know so far 4. So what is the 5th? It's another very interesting paper. This paper is by French and American economists, Philippe Novakmet, Thomas Piketty, and Gabriel Zussman. The first 2 are from Paris School of Economics. Gabriel Zussman is from UCB, University of California, Berkeley. And this paper is titled From Soviets to Oligarchs, Inequality and Poverty and Property, Inequality and Property in Russia, 1905. 2016. The paper is published in the Journal of Economic Inequality. The significance of this paper is in the fact that it deals with a very important issue for Russian economy. Everyone knows that Russia is unfortunately one of the most unequal, economically speaking, countries in the world. But hard evidence as to how exactly deep the economic inequality in Russia was and remains insufficient. And the paper attempts to fill this gap. And it uses data from multiple sources, from surveys, from fiscal data, from national accounts, and combines those data to estimate both income inequality and asset ownership inequality in Russia, and to argue that indeed the inequality is very high. The reason we did not recommend this paper for honorable mentioning was that some experts expressed doubts about the methodology of this paper and the appropriateness of some tools that the authors used. So it is our recommendation to still acknowledge this paper as an important contribution, and to recommend that this paper, that we have a chance to publicly debate this paper, hopefully having authors of this paper in Moscow physically, or, well, the pandemic's permitting online, so that these issues can be publicly debated, and the results should be made known to the general public. Well, my job is nearly done, and now the most interesting part, the most important one of this award ceremony, the the awardee paper, Democratizing Access to Higher Education in Russia, the Consequences of the Unified State Exam Reform. It is my understanding that Fabian will deliver this presentation. Fabian, the floor is going to be yours in just 1 minute. Those who are attending this gathering, please, if you have any questions, ask your questions in the Zoom group chat. It's to the right of your screen. And at the end of the presentation, that's the only way to go about this, given the fact that we do it online, your questions will be answered and discussed. Thanks so much. And Fabian, please, look forward to hearing your paper.
Okay, so thank you very much again. I'm going to share my screen. Right. So can you see the slides?
Yes, we can see everything and we can hear you. So please proceed.
Excellent. Well, so the paper has been now introduced, so I'm gonna just head on. And so one way to let me minimize this. Yeah. So one way to set the stage for what we did in this paper is to start by pointing out that if we look at, you know, in a very broad sense to countries all over the world, you see basically different kinds of admission policies for universities, for higher education. And these are basically the, you know, to discretize into two groups. One could say that you have some countries that fall into a group that have decentralized college admission policies. So in this group, you have countries like the United States, where you know, besides sometimes taking standardized tests like the SAT, students are always also required to write essays and, you know, comply with a number of regulations that pertain to the specific application process for each college. So these are, we call this decentralized college admission policy. And here you have a list of countries that have decentralized admission policies. So Japan, Finland, Israel, South Korea, Brazil, and probably some others, but these are the ones that we selected for our example in the paper. Now, one characteristic of this type of admission policy is that students are typically prevented from applying to more than one or a very small number of universities, right? Because each college has its own application system. It's prohibitively costly, both in terms of money and in time, to actually apply to more than one university. So in contrast to this, we have many countries where the application and admission processes are centralized. So you have a national exam, and that's the main criterion based on which admissions are made. And among these countries, or countries in this group, we count China, Taiwan, Italy, Belgium, Norway, and Germany. Okay. So in the case of Russia, what we study in this paper is the introduction, actually the move of Russia from one group to another, right? So, and that's what we call the Unified State Exam Reform in the context of this paper. So the Unified State Exam, I'm going to be very brief since I guess everyone that's listening to this pretty much knows what the Unified State Exam is. So it's a series of standardized tests that all Russian students take toward the end of their last year of high school. There are two tests, mathematics and Russian language, which are mandatory for high school graduation. And then there are a number of subject tests that students can take electively, depending on which program, which specialty they want to pursue when they apply to college. There was this major reform in 2009 by which most university admission decisions have to be based on the unified state exam scores. So again, being very brief, the way it works is that each higher education program decides which subject tests will be required. And there is also like a minimum score, a minimum threshold score to apply, typically not binding, it's typically fairly low. And so then students that take these subject tests and score above the threshold, they can apply to the program. So here's the key to the reform, is that after this point, programs have no discretionality. So they just receive the applications from students across Russia, and they are mandated to basically just sum the scores of the different exams. This is called the total score. And they must rank students just based on this total score and start offering applications to first to the person with the highest score, second highest score, and so on, until they exhaust all their vacancies or they run out of applicants, one or the other. I should add to this that also financial aid decisions, the scholarships, are also allocated based on this same system, starting in 2009. Now, prior to 2009, Russia belonged to the group of countries that have a decentralized system. So basically, each higher education institution in Russia had the discretionality, complete discretionality to basically design its own set of examinations, its own entrance examinations they were administered and graded in-house. They were highly variable, highly heterogeneous, one could say highly idiosyncratic in some cases, involving sometimes oral examinations conducted by a special committee. And these had obvious disadvantages. Fundamentally, the exams had to be taken in person. So students from distant locations had to incur the cost of travel to examination venues. Well, when we wrote the paper, we would have never thought of the current situation we're living in. Imagine what that would have been with the current pandemic, right? Whereas with the unified state exam, my understanding is that the process is to a great extent still going on as planned. So the other obvious disadvantage was that there were ample opportunities for corruption and favoritism, although because of obvious data problems, we couldn't really address. The second issue, we focused more on the first disadvantage, the huge costs to students, especially students living far away from the main educational centers in Russia, which are Moscow and St. Petersburg. Okay. So to give you an idea of what was the setting in which the reform was introduced, and this is related also with something that Leonid mentioned while talking about the honorable mentions and one of the papers that deals with inequality in Russia. So Russia is a highly unequal society. And so, for instance, here I have some statistics that we computed based on the 2006 RLMS. So looking at availability of higher education to people at different socioeconomic status, SES socioeconomic status. So 65%, around 2006, 65% of young individuals, 25 to 29-year-old, reporting having a university qualification if, so conditional on, their father also having a university degree. Whereas among those whose father did not have such a qualification, the number goes down to 20%, so 45% percentage points lower. So to give you an idea of how huge this differential of 45 percentage points is, this is comparable to the black-white male college graduation rate differentials in the 1960s in the United States, right? And there's a very interesting paper by Borisov and Pisaridis that looks more, I mean, it's actually fully dedicated to this issue of intergenerational mobility, and they basically have similar findings, only that the paper is only dedicated to this. Another way to look at inequality, and it's something that is important to our paper since we do look at geographic mobility, is that there was huge inequality across regions in access to education in Russia around the time of the reform. So less than 20% of the Russian population was born in the 10 largest cities, right? So Moscow, St. Petersburg, Novosibirsk, etc. So the 10 largest cities, that's 20% of the population. But those 10 cities explain 60% of all university graduates. On the other hand, only 1 in 10 graduates from universities are born in small cities, towns, and rural areas, even though that's half the population, right? So this again, extreme inequality in access to education around the time the reform was introduced. So that kind of gives the context to our question: did the reform actually help change this? And if it did, by how much? So the idea of the paper at heart is fairly simple. The idea is that the reform was aimed at reducing the cost of applying to college for students, especially outside the main educational centers. This is something that you will see we exploit in our empirical strategy. So obviously, the cost of applying to college was probably reduced across the board, but in particular, it was highly reduced to students far away from Moscow and St. Petersburg. So students are spared from preparing for program-specific entry exams and from repeated examinations. So these costs that materialize both in terms of time and money are greatly reduced by the fact that now students can take basically one exam that's standardized and the same across all of the country. And of course, the youth reform also had additional objectives, which we don't focus on in this paper, but should be, we hope, the object of future research. So let me briefly mention that for sure the reform was meant to address, at least partially, all the illegitimate practices associated with the old system. And also by introducing this standardized test that is the same across the country, it's also an instrument to monitor high schools, right? So you can, in principle, use it for that purpose. Okay. So in this paper, what we do is we focus on whether the Unified States exam reform had an effect on geographic mobility across Russia. So we do this in a number of ways. So the first thing that we do, so it's quite hard to study geographic mobility in Russia. There are not great data sources, so we faced a number of challenges. So basically, the way we tried to address this challenge in the paper was to basically not to claim that we have a single silver bullet that will basically address all concerns, but rather to provide a number of different pieces of evidence that we think collectively lead to the conclusion that the reform did have an effect on mobility. So let me tell you what these parts, these different pieces of evidence that we put together are. So one thing we do is we contrast mobility for students in the last year of high school. We contrast them to students who do not follow the high school track, but rather follow a different track. And most of them, they follow the vocational or technical school track, and they are in a similar age range. So they have similar ages. And so that's the first thing we do. And there you can already see, so I'm going to show you one figure that is actually the key figure of the paper later, where you can see very clearly that post 2009, you have a dramatic increase in the probability that a child that is in the last year of high school leaves the parental home within a year of being interviewed in the RLMS, which is our survey, the survey that we use, the source of data that we use in this case. And we also use this to show that the effect is concentrated in small cities and towns, as one would expect. So the second thing we do is to exploit the fact that even though, as I said, the reform probably reduced costs to applying to university across the board, clearly the effect for students that live in Moscow and St. Petersburg had to be much smaller. I mean, these students are closer to most universities, and actually the most prestigious universities, according to all rankings, are in these two cities. And also these students typically stay at home and they live with their parents while they're studying, especially in the first year after entering university. So we exploit this fact to compare, again, the probability of leaving the parental home within a year of interview. In this case, we just focus on all students are the same in the sense that they are all in the last year of high school. So they are all in the high school track, but now we compare across geographic areas. So Moscow and St. Petersburg versus other areas, other locations in Russia. And again, we find the same result, huge increase in mobility post-2009, especially in small cities and towns. So that's the second piece of evidence. Third piece of evidence is using a completely different measure of mobility. So basically, this is using the fact that the RLMS, in the number of interview years after 2009, asked everyone retrospectively about their university studies. And in those retrospective questions, there was one question which explicitly asked whether the person had to move, had to change residence or location for the purpose of starting a university program. So we can use that as an extra experiment or quasi-experiment to see if using that measure, we also find an effect of increased mobility. In this case would be an increase in the proportion of people that claim that they had to move to start a university program. And indeed, we do find that the college students were 8 to 12 percentage points more likely to come from a location other than the city where their university is based post-reform, right? So I'm gonna show you later a number of tables where I'm gonna go over these 3 different forms of evidence that, in our opinion, conclusively show that the unified state exam reform increased mobility, increased geographic mobility across Russia. So, but then, as Leonid pointed out, we also, we don't stay there. We don't just stick to geographic mobility, but we look at other outcomes. First, there is a part of the paper. Here we should also thank reviewers of the paper who actually pushed us in this direction. We looked at different mechanisms that could explain how and why geographic mobility increased post-reform. So we show that, in fact, the increase in mobility was particularly strong in households in which parents have a higher education diploma themselves. We showed that the reform also seems to have had a strong impact in intentions, declared intentions to attend college, even many years. So this is not just for the last year of high school, but for all students in the high school track, we find this. And finally, we also look at how distance to regional centers where the main universities are located interacts with the reform. So that's regarding mechanisms. Finally, we also look at related outcomes. In particular, we look at whether there were investments in human capital acquisition prior to the college applications, and we for this we use expenditures, the whole array of expenditures so there is this big part of the RLMS that covers all household expenditures, and we use that. I'm going to explain more later. We also document, this was quite an interesting finding, that post-reform, there is a significant increase in transfers from parental homes to children that live out of the home. So you could see that, you could also say that this is not just an additional outcome, but also further reinforces our point that there was an increase in geographic mobility. Finally, we looked at potential outcomes that might have been unintended or unexpected, like potential outcomes on parental labor supply or family dissolution, divorce, and we don't find any such effect. And we also look at labor market outcomes among young adults who do not move out of the parental home. So to try to see if there were some kind of spillover effects. So basically these are all the moving parts of the paper. Okay, so before I show you results, let me very quickly go over, I'm checking my time, I don't want to, okay, so I think I'm okay. So, so we have a small toy model or conceptual framework in the paper that we think helps understand the different forms of heterogeneity. That is why the effect of the reform might be stronger for certain groups or locations than in others, right? So the idea here is, so if you look at this simple picture, the idea is that the F curve will represent the net benefits of moving out of your parents' home after high school, right? And the idea is that these net benefits are increasing, strongly increasing, in fact, in ability. So if you are someone that is highly motivated and intelligent, these net benefits are higher than otherwise. Whereas the G curve, the red curve, represents the, let's say, the potential outcome if you, in the contrary case, so if you stay at home, right? So the idea is that the key assumption that we need to make is that this is less steep than the F curve, right? Is that the outcomes from staying with your parents, you know, they might be increasing in ability, but they are the gradient is less steep than for the case of living. And under those conditions, then you're going to have this kind of critical ability level, A star, and basically for everyone who has ability above A star, the net benefits of leaving the parental home are greater than the net benefits of staying. So they're going to decide to, their utility maximizers, they're going to decide to leave the parental home. So everyone to the right of A star moves, everyone to the left of A star stays with their parents, right? So very simple framework. So, and then the idea is to show two possible ways in which a reform such as the unified state exam reform might have changed this picture, right? So one way, which you have here, the idea is that the reform affects the net benefits of leaving the parental home. It increases them because now you can go to, it's cheaper to go to better colleges and you reap the rewards of that. But here the assumption is that this increase in net benefits is only for highly able individuals, right? Basically, for individuals that are to the right of the critical A star level. So what you can see is because the net benefits are only affected for these highly able individuals, there is really no change in A star, and then you would basically not see any effect on mobility, because the proportion of individuals who find it worth their while to move is the same before and after the reform, right? Those that move would see higher benefits, but this would not affect the proportion, right? So you will have no effect in mobility. A different case here would be, to make it really stark, you can say here the assumption is exactly the opposite, is that the net benefit of leaving the parental home is increased for everyone, absolutely everyone the same. So it's just a shift upward of the curve. So in this case, actually, now there are a proportion of people, basically the ones that are between A star and a double star, the new equilibrium, that now, they didn't used to find it worthwhile to leave the parental home, and now they do. So because of this expansion, you will see in the data an increase in mobility. So this helps us in two important ways for the paper. One way is to explain why it's not absolutely obvious that there should be an increase in mobility. It is not obvious. Basically, case one here shows us how it could not happen, right? So that's first point. The second point is this explains why, as I said before, there might be heterogeneity. Some groups of people or locations might have an effect, whereas other groups of people or locations might not. And this would basically depend on where in the ability distribution these locations or people are, which of course you have to understand that here when I talk about ability, really it refers to an observable variable that also encompasses all previous or all pre-higher education investments in human capital. So for instance, if one location has much worse quality of high school or primary school than other location, that would affect the average ability of the individuals in that location relative to other locations in terms of making a decision whether to stay or leave, right? So that's something that we're going to use to explain heterogeneity. Okay, so now let's go to results. So here's the figure I promised you. So what you see here is basically we take the RLMS, and basically this was the whole RLMS at the time that we were working on the paper. So we have data from 1994 up to 2014. Although because of what we are representing here is the fraction of children leaving the parental home within a year of interview, we lose the last year, of course, because you need one forward year to be able to compute this. And so basically you have two time series. One is the fraction of children leaving the parental home, given that the child is in the last year of high school, right? That's the figure with the purple, pink-purple circles. And then we have the figure with the green triangles that represents the fraction of children leaving the parental home within a year of interview, for children that are not in the last year of high school. Right? These are mostly children that are in vocational and technical school. Some of them just are out of studies, but the majority are in vocational and technical. And what you can see is that prior to the reform, right, for this figure, the relevant year is 2008, because remember that this is 1 year, we're looking 1 year ahead. So the post-2008 students are being affected by the reform. So you see that prior to 2008, basically the two time series are roughly parallel. I mean, there's some noise, but roughly parallel. Whereas post-2008, there is a clear divergence. So the series for students who are not in the last year of high school, students that are mostly vocational students, you know, is basically roughly flat, again with some noise, whereas the series for students in the last year of high school goes up dramatically, right? And this is for all students in Russia. So this is diluted by, for instance, the fact that, as I said, we don't expect an effect in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Even though we have this dilution, we still have this clear effect here. And then you see post-reform, we also have these dashed lines. These represent, so post-2008, we also know a more detailed reason why people leave the home. So these represent the fraction of children that leave the parental home exactly for the purpose of starting studies somewhere else. And you can see that for those that were in the last year of high school, this is basically 95% of them basically are leaving the parental home exactly to start higher education studies somewhere else. Whereas it's a very small percentage of the other students that are leaving the parental home for that purpose. Okay. All right. And please, if you have any questions, you can, again, type them in the chat. And maybe actually my co-authors can start answering some of those questions. And otherwise, I will answer them the best I can at the end. So these are basically regression coefficients from this difference in differences exercise, comparing students in the last year of high school versus students that are not in the last year of high school but are in the same age range. And what you see is that we have it for the full sample, then we have it for different locations, Moscow and St. Petersburg, other major cities, small cities and towns, and rural areas. And then the columns represent different set of control variables, right? So the first three are different control variables with a flexible common time trend, so basically ER dummies. And here in the columns 4, 5, and 6, we have group-specific linear trends. I'm not going to go into details. Basically, it's a different way to control for time trends. And finally, in column 7, we have, instead of a regression, we have propensity score matching. It's another technique. So basically, the identification is always the same. It's this difference in difference. It's just different technical details how to do it. And what you can see is that this differential jump that we see very clearly in the time series basically amounts to roughly 4 percentage points, right? And you see that it's statistically significant with the flexible common trend and the propensity score matching. With the group-specific linear time trend, it's really tough. Roughly, basically, because really, if you look at here, the trends are not linear. So I mean, we are really being unfair to ourselves here. But still, the estimates are positive, but we lose statistical significance. When we look at this by locations, what we see is that, well, first, for Moscow and St. Petersburg, where we don't expect really students, by and large, to leave the parental home because they can simply attend university staying in the parental home, there is no effect. And in fact, some of these estimates, or even most of these estimates, are negative. For other major cities, we have an effect. Sometimes, so it's always positive, sometimes statistically significant, sometimes not. In small cities and towns, what we see is a dramatic increase in mobility of 12 percentage points, sometimes higher, that is highly statistically significant. Here, the standard errors are clustered at the location level, so it's hard to get statistical significance. Our sample is not that huge. And then in rural areas, which is another interesting finding in the paper, we find no effect, right? So here, basically, looking at, in this table, we have all the two main effects that we report in terms of geographic mobility. You can see in this table. No effect in rural areas, dramatic effect in small cities and towns, some effect in other major cities, sometimes significant, sometimes no, and as expected, no effect in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Okay. Let me there's a lot more I could say. I could talk to you about, all the control variables that are here. I mean, it's a massive number of control variables that we include to try to control for socioeconomic status in all possible ways. And also, for instance, in column 3 and column 6, we have siblings fixed effect. So we are comparing households in which one sibling is affected by the reform by a sibling that, and another sibling that is not affected by the reform. And even in that very, there are not so many such households, still we find in small cities and towns a strong effect. Okay, now, there are a number of sensitivity checks that we do in this context. Basically, it's the same measure of mobility. We use an alternative control group. We are basically narrowing down to students that are in the last year of vocational school. So try to really narrow down to people that are very comparable to people that are in the last year of high school. And we find basically the same. In the column 3 and 4, there is a falsification test. Basically, what we do here is we create a placebo reform. So we drop all the years post-reform from our sample, and we pretend that there was a similar reform in 2002. And so the idea is, so if there were some other systematic thing about our treatment group relative to our control group, you would find that, if you put this placebo reform, you might find a positive effect for the placebo reform. We don't find such a thing. And in fact, you can see that in small cities and towns, the coefficient is negative. Finally, there is some, we are using the RLMS, it's a panel, and there is some attrition. There are some people that we lose to follow up. And when you lose them to follow up, you cannot determine whether the child left the home or not. So that might affect our estimates. So in the context of a duration model, we are better able to try to see if attrition is something that is biasing our results. And you can see that actually that's not the case. We still find a very strong result for small cities and towns, no result for rural areas, and no result for Moscow and St. Petersburg. Okay, so all of these would fall into our first empirical strategy to show that there was mobility and that there was heterogeneity in geographic mobility. So one more thing about these first strategies, we look at heterogeneity, which groups are more affected. And as I mentioned, basically the most relevant finding in this case is that when both parents have a university degree, there is a much stronger effect. Okay, so then the second way to do this is by comparing. Now we narrow down so you can see how our N, our sample size dramatically decreases to just 1,500 people. The reason is that these 1,500 people are all students in the last year of high school, okay? So now what we are doing is, again, it's diff in diff, but we are comparing students in regional centers, small cities and towns, and rural areas to students in Moscow and St. Petersburg. And you can see that, again, the effect in small cities and towns is very strong. So I think I'm going short on time, so I'm going to go quicker here. I'm going to skip this. college attendance intentions. This is regarding channels. So obviously one channel through which the reform might have affected mobility is through expectations. Now that the reform is in place, it might become, college might become something that you aspire to, whereas maybe before you didn't. So there are some measures of these aspirations in the RLMS, and we use them to show that in fact, only in small cities and towns, there seems to be an increase post-reform in these intentions to attend college. The final way, the third strategy that we use is this retrospective questions in the RLMS about having moved to college, having moved locations when you started college. So this will be the table that shows that for that third strategy, again, we have a very strong effect. In fact, when we use this measure, we can also, we have other findings, again, that I didn't go through in the introduction, that regard the field of study and the university ranking. I will skip that. So this table shows the other dependent variables, other outcomes that might be affected. I already mentioned them, but quickly again, I'm going to reiterate that we find an effect in transfers to children after the last year of high school, so when the child potentially has already moved. We see an increase in households' expenditures on education, basically tutors and books, in the last year of high school. We don't see an effect in fathers' labor force participation or earnings, or mothers' labor force participation or earnings, or in parental divorce, and we also don't find an effect in spillover. So basically, when we study people that do not move, we don't find significant changes in their probability of working versus studying locally. So sorry if I went a little bit over the 40 minutes that I was asked to constrain myself to. So quickly, we look at this very important reform in the Russian higher education system. We find that the USC reform significantly affected the mobility of students. This is robust to many different sensitivity checks. I'm not going to go into this again, including changing the measure of mobility that we use. The effect is concentrated in small cities and towns, and we find no effect in rural areas, probably because the quality of education, primary and secondary education in rural areas might not be good enough to allow students in those areas to exploit the reform. So that's all from me. I welcome your questions. Again, sorry if I went a bit over.
Many thanks, Fabian, and many thanks to Mark and Anna on this fantastic paper. We have some time for questions and answers, and I see so far a question in the chat column that you can see. Do you?
So yeah, we have a question from Victoria.
Yes, right. You can please. Yes, and
so Marco, maybe I will just leave the floor to my team.
Of course.
Already has skimmed. Marco, maybe expand on your answer. Repeat the question for everyone. And
all right. Thank you. Great stuff, Fabian, of course. Yeah, I mean, the question that Victoria is asking, very interesting. She's sort of raising the point that one educational question related to the USC is due to the fact that replacing general knowledge with exams that are or with particular tests in which students are asked to pass the test, and so they're taught to the test, might actually reduce their ability to think, as she says. And would this be an important consequence that the USC has sort of engendered? And if that's the case, would we have to look at this type of consequences? I would agree that this is an important issue. Unfortunately, with the data we have from the RLMS, we cannot really address this directly, but I think it would be actually something interesting to see. One possibility, for example, is actually to see and follow those university graduates once they are finished with their university degrees, and then eventually see whether or not they are better or more productive in some well-defined way, as opposed to other graduates who didn't go through the USC. Or it would be actually potentially interesting to look at other dimensions, like, for example, asking directly the ability to solve problems and the ability to think, rather than just passing exams. But in that case, we will need to have sort of more specific educational data, which at this point we don't have.
Excellent. Many thanks, Marka.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, please? Any other questions or comments to raise or to ask? Well, we are waiting for other questions, maybe.
There are a few, in fact.
Oh, there are a few. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Andrei Yakovlev is asking actually some questions about.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I see that. Please. Yes, of course.
Maybe Anna can say something about that.
Anna, please. It's a question about, right?
Yeah, so I wanted first to follow up on Victoria's question about following students still looking at the dropouts, both students in university, and see the rate of dropouts. So unfortunately, I don't know if this would be a good measure because of the quality of the students, since we would need to be sure that the university's policies have not changed over time, so there were no other complications there. But this is something to consider, and but it's also a data issue, I believe. So when we were working on this project, we have tried to use other data and find other data sources besides RLMS, obviously, and have found it to be very challenging. Like the availability of this data is well. So there is we weren't able to find data at the university levels. Right? So one of the things we could have looked, for example, is at the university whether the fraction of out-of-town students, right, have increased post the reform. Obviously, it's not perfect, right? But it would be something to illustrate our results. But we have found that this we couldn't find this data. We couldn't obtain it. So I'm concerned that dropout rates and then such may also be a challenge and to obtain. But it would be, of course, it's extremely interesting, and it is a very relevant question. What happens to the quality of education? So as for Andrei's question, other channels to enter elite colleges using national Olympiads. Oh yes. So this is an important channel, right? Would agree, especially for the elite programs, right? But overall, if I believe we have looked at the admissions routes, channels of admissions, USC versus Olympiads, and overall, Olympiads are a minor a minor share. So there is, of course, substantial heterogeneity. That is true among programs and universities. But overall, on aggregate, this is UC is a primary channel, and 80–90% are admitted via UCs.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I think Maria Yutkevich wants to make a comment. Maria, please, the floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to say that I'm really happy that such a great paper is awarded the Distinguished Prize. So my congratulations to the team. And I'm also particularly happy that such an important topic as an economic education becomes gradually an important part of our economist agenda. So it's really important that economists work with educational data, especially taking into account that initially everybody hoped that UEC data being open would provide a great resource for analysis of public policies, etc. But unfortunately, it didn't happen yet. So most of UEC data on micro level are still not available for analysis. So I don't understand how you had to make a great effort to make this analysis happen in your presentation and in your paper. So that's really a great job. And I also believe that the paper is important because it allows us to put some new open questions still to be analyzed and answered. And I would like to mention at least 3 of them, which might be of potential interest to think over in the future. First, you demonstrate in your paper there is a clear mobility effect, the mobility increases, but there is still an open question, why mobility? Why people becoming more mobile? Why they go for another town? And it might be at least 2 competing explanations for that. First, I want to get better education in Moscow. And another option would be I want a better labor prospects. That's why I first go to Moscow. I might apply not to very good place, but to some okay university or even low quality university, but it opened me the doors toward Moscow labor market. And that would be really great to test in the future why people use this mobility option. The second question, which is still open and might be addressed in the future, is what happened next after graduation. So we know from statistics that many people who come to another city, especially to the central city, they don't go back to their village or hometown. So they became a part of the labor market in this region when they graduated from the university. So this might be interesting to look at the effects of the labor force after this increasing mobility. And the third question would be that what was the effect of creating of strong 5 top 100 universities within regional centers? How it affected mobility in terms of distribution or mobility flows through the country? Because until recently, many people were headed toward Moscow and St. Petersburg, or probably Krasnoyarsk and Tomsk, but now we can see more options around us in the hometowns. What is the interplay of 2 types of effect of increasing mobility and also creating strong universities or okay universities next door? So how they play to each other? And probably not the question, but comment is that during the period that you study, the number of universities decreases substantially, especially in terms of regional branch universities. Many of them were closed during this period. So the number of these branch universities decreases in 2 times. So it might play some role in increasing mobility as well. So this would be great to take that into account somehow in the future paper, but still I do realize that it's just open questions for further discussions, and that you're really great that you started this discussion with your great paper. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much, Maria. Colleagues, would you like to respond? Marco, Fabian, Anna?
Well, I think we can all agree that the questions that well, first of all, thank you, and the questions that Maria brought up are indeed extremely interesting on what the effects on the labor markets, why people are actually moving, do people return or return back or stay? So all of these are very relevant, very interesting, and actually we are working on another project together, and hopefully we'll be able to address at least some of these questions because they are extremely important, of course, and interesting. Some other things, the university reform, that is true, and there have been, so national research universities have been formed. There have been changes there, and the numbers of the universities have declined over time. There's these things could have an effect on, of course, on the high school graduates' decisions and on the decisions of applicants. What I understand also is that while the numbers have been reduced of the universities, right, a lot of the reduction came in terms of mergers, right? So sort of weaker schools were merged with other places. So it would be interesting to look more closer at this data if we wanted to consider the effects in the future of these reforms. So it's all very interesting, but for the future.
Okay, thanks very much. Anything further? Let me see if there are any other questions or comments. Let me ask mine. It's in fact, it's a follow-up on Maria's. Two questions, if I may. The first one is you presented compelling evidence that mobility has increased. If I can take you to the theory that Fabian sketched, the theory implies that there might be two possible mechanisms to why this mobility increased. The first one is that more capable people that for some idiosyncratic reasons were unable to travel now have this possibility. And therefore, this mobility involves more talented individuals. Another one, and that's what your sketch suggests, is that the cutoff level of talent above which people are able to travel goes down. And as a result, in your increased mobility pool, you have people of kind of mediocre talents that were not able to travel before but can do it now. There is an old paper by Schlaffer, Murphy, and Vishny about the allocation of talent, which implies that for economic development, it's important that the top 5% or whatever on the talent scale make the right allocation decisions. And these two types of mobility increase have different implications for development, I guess. And I believe your data does not give you the opportunity to test this hypothesis, but I think it might be a good question to ask down the road. And my own anecdotal evidence, which is not scientific and it's a very small sample, but I did observe in the course of the last few years that there are some exceptional talented students coming from outside of Moscow and outside of St. Petersburg. So I think there is some very crude evidence that in fact this reform helps more talented people to move rather than allowing people of mediocre talent to move, perhaps seeking some better employment opportunities in the capital cities, as Maria suggests. And the second question is also related to the previous comments by Maria, is about the brain drain. It's great that people have increased mobility. It's great that they're able to get their education at Moscow State, high school, whatnot. But chances are they will not come back to their home regions for a variety of reasons. And if that is the case, there might be an adverse effect of this reform. Or it might not be. In fact, your paper shows that there are no negative spillovers for the home regions of these more mobile younger people, because this did not affect employment opportunities for those who stay at home, which is good to know, and that's an important result. But another question still is, what about the fact that best and brightest will probably not come back to a provincial town A, B, and C, right? And again, that's a question that can be answered at the macroeconomic level. What does it do for Russia's economic development, or for whatever? But on the other hand, what does it do for regional economic disparity, which is very high as it is now, and is it likely that this reform will make matters worse? And it's just a domestic version of the well-known brain drain problem, and we know that could be beneficial brain drain. There is a variety of mechanisms. So I think that's something that might be worth exploring down the road. Any response to this other than that might be a valid point?
I think that you are raising very interesting points. I mean, and it's not just a rhetorical, sort of statement. The points that you are all raising, and in fact, both Maria and you, Leonid, and as well as our new comment from Victor,
Yes.
as well as the points that even Victoria raised earlier, are all sort of pointing to some extent to the same sort of issues, and they're all very important. I mean, the idea of, okay, after having established that there has been a mobility, what are the consequences of this mobility? So one point that you made was related to ability. Are actually the less able who are moving now rather than not. Now, of course, if there are more people joining universities, it may, by all means, we cannot expect that everybody has got the highest possible IQ. The average distribution of ability has not changed dramatically. It cannot have changed very dramatically over a relatively short period of time. So therefore, it is possible that some people at the margin are of lower ability, as opposed to when we only had 5% of the whole population studying. However, this is a question that all states, not just Russia, but every developed nation has to face when we are expanding the educational system and the university system in particular very dramatically. What are the trade-offs in doing that? And does it come with a dilution of quality, or can it come with an increase in productivity anyway? And what we are trying to see, what we have, we cannot answer directly these questions with the paper, but what we are trying to see indirectly is that there is not really a dramatic compromise in terms of the quality of people who have joined this, who have joined the universities in these recent years. In a continuation of the paper that we would like to go into is, in fact, to understand this process a bit more directly. Is there, in fact, a very big reduction in ability, which we don't feel it is the case, or is there instead an adjustment also from the viewpoint of universities? And it is possible that universities are responding differently post USC as opposed to what they were doing pre USC. So that's clearly a very important dimension. The other stuff related to regional labor markets is very important too. I mean, all the literature that we know in many other Western countries related to the importance of gentrification and city developments to the expenses of rural areas is actually pointing at the importance of reinvesting back in rural areas or in regional labor markets. And here I think perhaps a newer, another nuanced dimension of the research is in fact to understand how policy at the periphery is going to respond to this. I mean, is there a way for peripheral areas to reattract back brains, not just brains, but also big investments that will create new opportunities for people outside the larger cities? And that's clearly a very big question, which goes beyond what we were interested in the paper, and I think also goes beyond what we are trying to address in the new set of questions, in the new set of papers that we're about to embark on. But maybe Fabian and Anna have other comments, and maybe other people in the meeting have other comments to slice in.
Yes, I just wanted to say that to add that all of the sort of this issues and questions that have been brought up, they are about sort of even deeper issues going beyond this, the effects of the reform, which is basically we can view this reform as a tool to increase competition among universities. We know when there is more competition, there will be winners, there will be losers. Right? So, and if we look beyond the acquiring education and into the effect on labor markets, right? Then yes, there will be winners in that respect and losers as well. So this is the issue of also unfortunate but big inequalities, geographical inequalities, all kinds of inequalities among regions in Russia. And there are so many levels and challenges and issues there that while we would love to address them and study them, and hopefully will be able to contribute to answering and addressing some of the issues. I don't think there is. It's definitely beyond many of these things are beyond us. While extremely important and interesting.
Excellent. Many thanks. And let me see if there are any other questions, any other comments. I don't see any, which leaves me to once again thank the team, Marco, Fabian, Anna, for taking the time to attend this ceremony, for the excellent work that you guys have done. Again, congratulations. I'm not sure if you can arrange a round of applause on Zoom. It was never tried before. There might be interferences, but just, use your imagination. We are applauding your work. We congratulate you once again. We hope you have success. We look forward to hearing from you about your follow-up research, because you touched extremely important and very promising issues. And we certainly look forward to hopefully see you live in Moscow before too long. In the meantime, please be well, be safe, keep social distancing, and thanks again. Congratulations. That concludes our session and ceremony. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thanks.